It is now my pleasure to introduce you, Dr. Bernhard Url, not only the EFSA director, but also my boss. Bernhard has been following EFSA's activities in a number of capacities. First as director of a member state food safety organization in Austria, AGES. Then he became a member of the management board, and now since June 2014, he's our director. Above all, I want to thank Bernhard for having been an unrelenting supporter of us putting this conference together. Thank you, Bernhard.
Thank you very much, Hubert. Dear Dr. Rocco, dear guests, dear EFSA staff, welcome to the second EFSA Scientific Conference. For me, personally, it's a huge privilege to be here today with you. And it's a manifold privilege. It's a privilege because I will be in the position to listen to scientific contributions. We can do this with people from 70 countries. We have invited excellent speakers, and they have accepted our invitation. And last but not least, we can do this on a meaningful topic, because what we want to produce is safe food. So in our job, we are so privileged that the meaning of what we do is built into the work. And this makes a conference like that a pleasure. I hope it will be a success, but this has to be seen. We are at the beginning. We have prepared it for 18 months. A fantastic team of EFSA has done this work. And now I have the feeling it has to unfold, and it will unfold like a flower. And I hope on Friday we will see this flower in full blossom. We have also a number of young scientists here. We have invited them to present posters and to showcase their work. And I would like to thank them also for taking the effort to come to us. We may come from different countries, even from different continents, but we are united in one thing. We want to protect public health in food, feed, environment. Who are we, EFSA? EFSA is the European Union Agency for Food Safety. EFSA was created about 13 years ago following food crisis in the 90s, with a clear separation between risk assessment done by EFSA and risk management done by the European Union and by the member states. We do these operations with 10 scientific panels on different topics, with one overarching scientific committee, and we do this with a network of 1,500 scientists coming from all over Europe and above and beyond. We together build what we call the European Risk Assessment Community. And EFSA, because of this collaboration, can deliver on a yearly basis about 500 scientific opinions. And I think this is something very useful for the European Union. Now, about this conference, and I try to build a bit of a context to this conference. The topic of this conference is shaping the future of food safety together. And it is not by coincidence that we linked our conference to the Milan Expo 2015, which features the theme, Feeding the Planet, Energy for Life, which already gives us a sign that food safety cannot be viewed in isolation. It has to be embedded into a much broader context of food security, of sustainability, poverty, even, inequality, and finally, the resilience of our planet. To put the topics of our conference into a broader context, I found it useful to differentiate between three different layers of interaction. The first one is the systems of food production, food consumption, a world where real physical goods are moved, produced, distributed, and consumed. The second layer I would call the science of risk assessment. And the third layer I would call the interaction between science and society. When we look at the system of food production, there are many drivers from the demand side and also from the supply side that give an incredible dynamics to this world of food production. It's the growing population, it's changing dietary habits, Let's look at Asia, where more and more appetite is coming for animal proteins. We have the issue of food waste. We have the issue of obesity. We have migration. Now in Europe, we face it very toughly, the issue of migration. We have the phenomenon of aging society. We have malnutrition and inequality. And this is underlined by, or you could say it's supported or challenged by climate change and obviously by economic interests. It is economic operators that drive innovation and then that try to fulfill, to answer demands and to create new demands. The consequences of these drivers are globalized movements of people, of foods, but also of hazards. With food, we trade hazards, chemical hazards, biological hazards. And we have quite some examples now. If you look to southern Italy, with Xylella fastidiosa and olive trees, a hazard we imported from other parts of the world. So we have globalized movements. We have incredibly complex supply chains, global supply chains. We have relentless competition in business. We have ever-accelerating innovation. And we have a concurrence for risk assessors of scarcity of data and data abundance. Now, EFSA, we are not the regulator to set standards in trade, but we have to keep pace with globalization of hazards and with technological innovation. So we have to be prepared for emerging risks, and we have to do our own innovation in risk assessment methodologies. We try to cover these topics at our conference with a breakout session on advances in environmental risk assessment. We have one session on emerging issues in animal and plant health, and we have one session on nutritional challenges. If you allow me to move to the second layer, which I call the science of regulatory risk assessment, which interferes with the world of the real goods, with the world of the physical goods. We look at it from a data and evidence perspective. And you could say, in risk assessment, we process mainly 3 ingredients, if you allow to use me this word, because we are talking about food. And the ingredients are expertise, data, and methodologies. With regards to human expertise, EFSA has been created by the European legislator as a quite delicate model because we rely in our scientific expertise to a huge extent to volunteers coming from the member states. You could say EFSA has outsourced its core business process to volunteers that we don't pay well, that we don't have a contract with, and that we don't control. This system has a lot of advantages. It's flexible, it's cheap, we stay at the forefront of science, but it's also a delicate model. And we have to look for the next generation of regulatory scientists. And I think we in Europe, and there we can learn, I think, from the US, we need to have a better link between academic research and regulatory science. This link, from my point of view, is not well established, and we have to do more together to bring academic basic research together with regulatory science. We have a breakout session here at the conference. We call it Expertise for the Future, to talk about how to build and train the next generation of regulatory scientists. If we look at data and evidence, the second ingredient for risk assessment, you could say data and evidence is the lifeblood of risk assessment. And we have made in Europe tremendous progress with the member states in the fields of chemical currents, zoonosis prevalence data, food consumption data. And I would like to take the opportunity here to thank our member state colleagues to make this joint progress possible. But still, we have a lot of specific risk assessments we cannot conclude. We cannot conclude mandates because of lacking data. So many issues have to be solved in this area. One is, how can we share data between publicly funded organizations as a starting point? How can we make use of data that industry generates for their own purposes? A huge amount of data we are not fully capitalizing on. And how can we, risk assessors, influence research agendas and research funding to address the needs for safety assessments? We will hear this afternoon in our session from a colleague from the United States, Nigel Walker, about a good example how in the United States, resources were successfully combined in a national toxicology program. We at EFSA, we want to make our data as open as possible, make it reusable for others, for the creation of new knowledge. But there we need the support of the data owners. Again, we need the support from the member states to make the use of our information more open. And we have reserved room at our conference to discuss these issues. We have sessions on open risk assessment. We have a session on weighing evidence and assessing uncertainty. And I'm quite sure that Professor Sterling will cover the question of how to deal with uncertainty right afterwards in our plenary session. We will also cover uncertainty in our session on microbiological risk assessment on Friday morning, besides other topics, important topics, like the global burden of foodborne diseases. If I come to the third ingredient, methodologies, there we are facing complex scientific questions in risk assessment, like combined exposure to multiple chemicals via different routes, or the interference of chemicals with the developing hormone system, or a possible role of pesticides in degenerative diseases. To tackle these questions, we need more innovation in our science, and we need a global cooperation in risk assessment. For us as EFSA, it's no longer enough to think on a European level. We have to build a global risk assessment community. You could say this is a no-brainer because we are trading with 200 countries all over the world. And if we trade with 200 countries, obviously the question of food safety is a global issue. But even if everybody would agree, it's a long way to go to bring this into practice. So the challenges listed up to now, I think, would already fill the program of more than one conference. But one important additional aspect, from my point of view, deserves our attention. It's the role of risk assessment, or more generally, the role of science in society. We observe, and we are part of a delicate interaction between the pure scientific risk assessment on the one side and the perceptions, expectations, sometimes frustrations of the society. One could say science meets values, and then things seem to be a bit more complicated. In a more narrow view, from a risk assessment perspective, it is about the interaction in multiple ways, how risk assessment questions are framed, the scope, the breadth, the context of risk assessment questions, how the process of assessments is organized, transparent, interactive, centralized, decentralized, iterative, how evidence is generated, collected, assessed, and integrated, which methodologies, models, decision tools are used, and how are the groups selected, the people that perform the assessment. But from my point of view, in addition to that, there are more fundamental, general questions pending. For example, how is the relationship between science and decision-making organized in a democratic society? And I'm sure that Professor Yazanov will speak about this topic in a few minutes. There's the question, does science need to be detached from society for its proper functioning, or should it be anchored in the heart of society? And is there a solution for that, or is it a paradoxon? And maybe even more important from my point of view, how is the generation of data and knowledge that is needed for the public good organized and financed in our societies? You could take the viewpoint that with the commercialization of universities, of research, with shrinking public budgets, who produces the knowledge that we need for safety assessments? Because the time of the hypothesis-driven, curiosity-driven universities, you could say, is getting a bit at the edge, because what we want is innovation, short time between bench and bedside. We talk about Europe of growth, of competitiveness, which is fine, but to a certain point, I think we also have to make sure that the data needs for safety assessments, technology impact assessments are fulfilled. We have assigned room for these reflections at our conference. The plenary session of today focuses on this question, and we have 2 breakout sessions on open risk assessment, which will also touch upon these questions. The last day of our conference, the Friday, the 16th of October, coincides with the World Food Day, on which we commemorate the fight against hunger and poverty, together with our colleagues from FAO, WHO, and member states. This celebration, this day, gives an additional spin to the contribution of our European Commissioner for Health and Food Safety, Vytenis Andriukaitis, who will address our conference on Friday afternoon. Also on Friday, we will have a final panel session with scientists and stakeholders about conclusions, lessons learned, and takeaway messages, also actions generated by our conference. Ladies and gentlemen, this conference for me is a highlight on EFSA's way to build the strategy for the next 5 years. We will integrate the outcome of your discussions into our strategy to deliver the maximum added value to the European societies. The passion for this endeavor we gain from our values. And our values are scientific excellence, independence, openness, collaboration, and innovation. As a motto for this journey, we have coined the term from truth to trust, which means we will continue to provide excellent scientific outputs in a partnership approach with our EU member state colleagues and increasingly on a global level. And we will organize this work in the most transparent and participative way to support timely decision-making on the one hand, but also to demonstrate our accountability towards the society. Now I'm really curious to listen and to learn from the conference what we as EFSA can do and what we have to do to deliver trusted science for safe food. I thank you for having followed our invitation, and I wish you fruitful encounters with knowledge, with people, and with a bit of serendipity. Enjoy EFSA's conference and Milan. Thank you very much.